I think that the mood music in number 10 is not really about sort of revolution. It's more about catching up with the rest of the world. It's incredibly anachronistic that we currently have a national broadcaster funded in effect by a tax, that if you want to watch TV, say ITV, Sky, whatever, you still have to pay for the BBC. That's clearly a very outdated model that virtually no other country in the world follows. And it's right that this is being discussed actively in number 10, and people at the top of number 10 have believed this for a long time. It's been something that actually came up on the campaign trail during the election as well. There was a meeting with the Prime Minister, I think it was in Sunderland, where actually one of the spontaneous questions from the audience is, what are you going to do about the licence fee? This is something that actually comes up on the doorstep, and it's right that they tackle it.
But James Meadway, I mean, look, I'm obviously delighted about this. It's one of my pet issues. But I think I can't entirely agree with Tom that it's not dramatic, because according to the Sunday Times report, if they go through with what they're saying, I mean, yes, you're talking about a subscription fee, but you're also talking about selling off 60 radio stations, potentially either shutting or closing BBC Radio 1, BBC Radio 2, also some of the big broadcasters like BBC 2, BBC 4. I mean, look, I think this is right. But will it ever be accepted, because there's already this revolt from Tory backbenchers?
Well, I think that's the problem you run up against. And bear in mind, it's the Sunday Times front page, and it is your classic senior source in Downing Street says. So we're quite some distance from legislation and things being enacted as yet. And also, if memory serves, the whole sort of licence fee renewal process runs through to 2027 anyway, so it's potentially quite a long time discussing this. I suspect at least some of doing this sort of thing is not so much to necessarily carry out all the threats on, we're going to close down radio stations, get rid of this, get rid of that, get rid of the licence fee. But it is quite a neat way to apply some pressure to the BBC, perhaps, if you're the government, and try and keep them in line over this period of time. And that, I think, is something.
And is that wrong?
Concern. Well, it's what governments do, and it's what governments have been doing for some period of time. Now, the BBC is in this peculiar position of being, look, it's a government-owned broadcaster. It's something that is state-owned. It is, in other countries in the world, you have these things. They're called state broadcasters. What we have with the BBC is a certain sort of social contract. The BBC literally writes its charter. It's supposed to be there to provide a public service. There's certain restrictions and ways it's supposed to operate. And I think the problem the government is going to run up against, and you can see already from some of the backbench Tory MPs, is that a lot of people appreciate having that. And it's actually quite a well-respected institution. Now, I do think, and obviously being on the left, I'm certainly going to say there are issues with how BBC News in particular has conducted itself recently. But that's got to be part of a wider discussion of what we're doing with news in general, what we're doing with media in general. What we probably all want, is lots and lots of different outlets all saying different things, having the entire, if you like, ecology of media, catering for every different bit of the market. The BBC's got a role in that. How we best protect and carry on with that role, I think, is up for discussion.
That's true, but we can't see the BBC as if it has to be frozen in time as it exists today. If we go back 15 years even, all of these extra channels did not exist. We had a thriving BBC in the 1990s without CBBC and CBeebies and 24 radio stations and all of the extra
and also,
paraphernalia
what about podcasts about reality TV? What
and
about
local news?
website articles about Love Island?
One of the biggest things actually is the competition that they're crowding out local news. Small newspapers from regions, cities, towns are being pushed out of business because the BBC is crowding out that market. That's a problem, and it needs to be tackled.
Well, I kind of agree with you in that, to at least some extent. I do think there's an issue with the BBC sort of regional and local output, although I suspect the solution to it is actually sort of regionalise it even more, give more freedom, creativity, break up, the very centralised model the BBC has, and give the regions like used to have perhaps the old ITV.
The fundamental problem is how competitive the BBC is. So I was with an executive from the BBC the other day who was defending to me privately the fact that they absolutely wanted to continue to take on The Sun, covering reality shows like Love Island, because they think that's the way for them to get young viewers. I would say, Tom, the way for them to get young viewers is to make high quality drama that is not being provided in the commercial sector, that uses young British talent. And then that's what they can focus on.
If they're trying
they
to
don't need to do Love Island coverage because it's been done by the commercial sector.
If they're trying to be a commercial station, they undermine their purpose in the first place, which is to do the things that the market might not necessarily provide for. I think it's a weak argument in the first place, because I think there is demand out there for high quality news. We're going to see with Times Radio, for example, finally a competitor to Radio 4. We're seeing lots of other things being presented. The market offers this. If the government gets out of the way, usually these sort of solutions spring up and bubble up, and it's more creative, it's more dynamic, it's more diverse, and it's better for the consumer.
Well, look, time will tell, and it will be one that we closely follow on this show.